Well, Joe, the people have spoken. We have our top books of 2019.
I'm excited about this. We certainly do have some good ones here.
Yes, and to be honest, number one, it's not even close. It's number one by a large margin.
Yes.
Which kind of makes me happy because I really, really like this book.
Yeah.
So I thought maybe for at the beginning of this episode, we could go over some of the top results, top three from the poll, and then maybe your top book of 2019 and my top book of 2019.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But the number one book, as voted on by the Bookworm Club, was Atomic Habits by James Clear, episode 63. And I completely agree with that. Atomic Habits is a phenomenal book. I actually read it at the end of 2018 when it first came out. We recorded the episode in 2019, which is why it was in the poll. But this is a phenomenal book. And back in Christmas 2018, I think I gifted like 5 different copies of this book to people that I knew.
Nice.
I generally hesitate to gift copies of books because I feel like I'm a little bit weird. And if I really enjoy a book, there's a good chance that other people won't. But James Clear's book was so good that I took the chance.
Decided to break the rule.
Yep, I broke the rule. Number 2 at 17% of the vote was The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan, which again, I really enjoyed that book. That was episode 60. And number 3, episode 64, was Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. Then there were a lot of others that were 5% or lower. But thank you to everyone who participated in the poll, and good job picking these 3 books.
Yeah, for sure.
I think if I were to go back and pick the top 3 myself, this would be pretty similar. I think these are 3 very influential books, and there's a lot of good books on this list to choose from, but I have a hard time arguing against these as the top 3 books.
I know I had a number of people say, like, wait, I only get 1 vote. It's like, yes, you only get 1 vote. Like, that's all that's allowed. You're not allowed to pick multiple here, which makes it quite a bit harder, I think. But I'm with you whenever I look at this list of books. The 3 that came to the top, pretty easy ones for me to agree with, for sure. I honestly, if I had to go to number 4, I'm not real sure where it would be because there's a bunch of them that I feel like could fit the number 4. So seeing Atomic Habits, The One Thing, and Digital Minimalism at the top, that's a pretty solid lineup right there, for sure.
That is. Yep. If you were to pick 3 books to read from this list, if you've not read any of them, that's a great place to start. So what was your top book of 2019?
So I of course built the poll that went up there. So that meant I got the chance to vote right away. So I don't know if I biased people by having the first book voted for. But the one that I put as my number 1 was Digital Minimalism, which I'm sure is probably not much of a surprise. But at the same time, like that book, I think I've read it a couple more times since then too. So it's one that I find myself continually coming back to. So I really, really liked that one, obviously. What was yours?
Mine is actually one that I just finished and is not even on this list. That is Stillness is the Key by Ryan Holiday. I really enjoyed this book. It's very Ryan Holiday-esque. He's a phenomenal writer. The way that he writes and like the way that he puts together his stories is just phenomenal. He's one of the best storytellers I've ever read, and he just has so many, like there's a lot of people that have like the one-liners that are very memorable. With Ryan Holiday, it kind of feels like every sentence is that way. So I ended up jotting down a bunch of things, bunch of quotes, bunch of notes, and really, really enjoyed that book. So I don't know, maybe we'll cover that one at some point for Bookworm.
It's almost not even fair to pick one that's not on the list. What was your? Which one did you vote for? Like, which one was on the poll that you picked?
From the list, I think I voted for Atomic Habits because that was the most influential book. Like I said, I technically read that first in 2018, so I was going to pick a different one if I had to pick my top book that I read in 2019.
Sure.
I reread that, so I guess you could say I read that in 2019 too.
Okay.
But yeah, I really enjoyed that book. I think that's that's the kind of book that you could recommend to just about anybody, and they're going to get something out of it. They're going to enjoy it.
Sure.
It's very broad reaching, but also very well written, very practical book. And I enjoyed it so much.
Nice. Well, good luck on picking another one for the next year. I feel like this is going to be a tough one to beat as I'm looking at these top 3 books. Like this is going to be a challenge, I think.
For sure.
But there's always a long list of great ones. So we'll see what we land on in 2020. But that said, thank you to everyone who voted. And I'm sorry that I made you pick only one, but I think it's worked out better in the long run. But there's that. Top books of 2019.
Awesome. All right, so let's talk about action items now. Joe, did you figure out what your just cause is?
I know things that it's not. Like,
I guess that's helpful.
Here's where I am in the process. I made a list of things that could qualify as my just cause. When I made said list, it was much longer than I expected. I had 18 different potential items on this list, and I have been slowly combining, consolidating, whittling it down, wondering what I was thinking or what I was smoking whenever I made the list, and then I'm down to about 4 on that list, but I don't have the full answer yet, because holy buckets, this is hard. Like, This is not a simple thing to just, I'm going to go determine what my just cause is this weekend. No, it doesn't work that way. So I am continually working on it, but I don't have the full answer yet, but I can say I've made progress on it.
Okay.
Does that count?
Well, I also have an action item here of figuring out what my just cause is, and now you made me think that I did it wrong. So I basically tried to combine all of the different things that I have, the life theme, the core values. And I did land on a phrase, which I know, to your point, is not going to be 100% correct, but I think it's a great place to start at least. So here we go. My just cause is to help people make the most of what they have to work with. There you have it.
Interesting. I feel like that could go so many different directions.
Exactly. That's kind of the point.
Huh.
So there's a productivity angle to that. There's a tech nerd angle to that. There's a spiritual church angle to that. There's a lot of different angles to it.
No kidding.
That's the single theme, cause, whatever. That is, I'm going to mark that as done, even though, like I said, it will probably evolve and change over time.
Sure.
The other action item I had was to consider how can I build a circle of safety for my kids. I think there's a lot more work to be done with this, but I also think that there's some steps in the right direction. So kind of going back to the what is my just cause, I also identified a couple of words for this year, which David Sparks and I unpacked this in the recent episode of Focus, but my 2 words were rest and relationships. So I had those as like my themes or my just cause, if you will, for the year 2020. Like that's what I want to prioritize. And one of the things that that touches both of those areas and is in alignment with this, helping me fulfill this action item, I believe, is we did something a little bit different for Christmas this year. Instead of buying individual gifts for all the kids and each other, because we've all got too much stuff, we floated the idea, first of all, and everybody thought it was great, so we ran with it, but we did a couple group gifts. One of them was a puppy named Lucy, which you have seen, at least in video.
Hi, Lucy.
And the other was a ping pong table. And I liked playing ping pong when I was a kid. We got a pretty nice ping pong table with the hope that my kids would really enjoy it. Like I said, we talked to them about this before we decided to do this year, and they were all really excited about it. So the goal was that they would really enjoy playing ping pong. I would take more breaks during my day. Like I'd be in a writing session. I'd come out of my office. My kids are homeschooled. So, we time our breaks together, and instead of scrolling through social media or whatever, I can play some ping pong with my kids. And one of the things that's interesting is that, and this was the hope, was that just spending time together will facilitate conversations. Whether that happens to be, while you're playing a board game or eating a meal together, also happens around the ping pong table. So I think that is just one small step in how I can help build a circle of safety for my kids, just by continuing to develop those relationships. But like I said, there's still a lot more to be done here, I know.
Sure. I feel like this is something you're never fully done with.
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, those are my action items. Ready to jump into today's book?
Sure, I'm focused and ready.
All right, are you Indistractable? Because that is, in fact, today's book, Indistractable by Nir Eyal.
Probably not completely, but hey, we'll go give it a shot.
Okay. So this was a highly voted for book in the Bookworm Club. Nir Eyal is also the guy who wrote the book Hooked, which was how to make habit-forming products. I knew that as I went into this. I started Hooked and could not finish it. That's one of the few books that I have not been able to finish. And while I liked the premise of this book, I have to admit I was very skeptical going into it. I thought I was not going to like this at all. I thought this was basically somebody who was in the startup world trying to capitalize on the whole essentialism deep work trend that has been going on the last several years. I was pleasantly surprised, though. There's a lot of great stuff in this book. We're not going to go through all the individual chapters because I believe there are 35 different chapters. They are broken down into different sections. And the good news is that, good news, I guess, there's not just 3 sections. The also maybe good news is that there are 7. So that's the way we're going to tackle this episode, is we're going to break it down into these different sections. And let's start here with the introduction. I put this on the outline, even though you maybe didn't need to, because he has a couple of important points that he talks about at the beginning here. Number 1 being the difference between traction and distraction, which I liked. Traction is moving towards what you really want. Distraction is moving you away from what you really want. And that is going to pop up over and over and over again in the book. He's got a little diagram where he's got basically 2 different axes and then the point in the middle. And on the top of the cross diagram basically is the internal triggers. On the bottom is the external triggers. And then on the right, you've got traction. On the left, you've got distraction. So he's got little arrows pointing all these different ways. Basically what you want to do and how this is broken down, you want to master your internal triggers, make time for traction, hack back external triggers, and prevent distraction with packs. And anything else you want to add from this introduction? Otherwise, we can jump right into the first part here, which is mastering those internal triggers.
Just that, the book overall is specifically geared towards understanding what causes distraction and then what to do about it. I haven't read Hooked, and I don't own it, don't have really much of an interest to read it, but I know that there are quite a few people that say that it was hard to read, but at the same time, I hear other folks say it's very easy to read. I was curious, Mike, why did you put it down? Was it because the style of it was hard to read, or was it the content that caused it to be like something you didn't want to go through?
I think it was just the wrong thing at the wrong time, and it just felt icky.
Sure.
I tried to read it. It must have been a couple of years ago now, and I remember getting about halfway through it and recognizing that everything that he was saying is true, and then at that point saying, "Oh my gosh, everything that he's saying is true."
Sure.
And I can see how Facebook is using this, and Google is using this, and all of these evil empires are using this against me. And it just did not sit well with me. And at that point, I got to put this down. I can't think about this anymore. But that's kind of to Nir Eyal's point, is like this traction versus distraction. Distraction, he talks about in the next section, what motivates us really. He talks about distraction being an unhealthy escape from reality. So if I'm honest with myself, when I was reading Hooked, I was like, this is reality. I don't like it. I need to find something to distract me from it.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think the whole traction, distraction, internal, external triggers diagram, and just to expand on that slightly, with the internal triggers at the top, the external triggers at the bottom, you have arrows that come down and up from each of those respectively, and then they go to the outside from there. So you'll have internal triggers from the top coming down, and it can either go to distraction on the left or towards traction to the right. Same thing with external triggers. They come up from the bottom and can either go left or right to distraction or traction. And like I'm not really sure how this diagram is supposed to be used other than it's just helpful to understand it somewhat, because he does come back to it quite a few times. And it is kind of helpful to see, just to give you that reference point and something to talk through. But I really came away from it with the more of an understanding of, okay, if I have internal and external triggers that can cause distraction, how do I get that to shift over to the traction side? Basically, what am I doing wrong?
Sure.
So that was a lot of what I got from that piece, but obviously we're going to go through a number of these different individual pinpoints, but that diagram, although it's helpful at the beginning, I'm not sure it was super helpful overall, but that's just me being
Yeah, I wasn't
picky.
a big fan of the diagram, to be honest. I don't think it's all that helpful. I think it's helpful in showing or lending some visible credibility, maybe, to what he's going to tell you. I don't know. If you have a diagram, it just kind of looks like you've thought this through more fully than maybe somebody else.
Yeah.
That's kind of the purpose I felt like it was serving. But I don't disagree with any of it. I just don't think it's all that helpful. Sometimes you see those diagrams and you're like, oh, that makes so much sense. I can totally see how this is going to help me. That's not what you get from this diagram. But
Right.
But that's okay. So first section here under mastering internal triggers, there's a couple things I wanted to talk about. Number one, he's got a whole chapter on how time management is pain management. And I thought this was fascinating because this is totally true. At least I can see it in my own life, how we try to manage our time in a way that we don't feel quote unquote bad. And he says that there are a couple different psychological factors that make satisfaction temporary. Number one is boredom. Number two is a negativity bias. Number three is rumination. And number four is hedonic adaptation. So no matter how great our situation is, at some point we're going to feel dissatisfied with it. And when we start to feel dissatisfied, we're going to look for something that's going to give us the next dopamine hit. And that's not a healthy way to deal with things. Dissatisfaction and discomfort, he says, dominate our brain's default state. And instead of just using them or trying to placate our brain and medicate with whatever it happens to be, whether it's drugs, alcohol, or social media, we can use those things to motivate us instead of defeat us, which I think is a very interesting idea. Feeling bad, he makes the point in this section, isn't actually bad. And I think that's an important idea worth unpacking.
I really like the concept of time being the same as pain management, because I don't know how many times I'm in scheduling conversations and it really is which process or which path is going to be less painful. Okay. If I'm choosing between something that's going on at our church, an event that I either need to be at or should be at, and something that, say a piano recital for my daughter, like that is pain management at its finest, most likely. So that's one that I struggle with, but I also really enjoyed his analogy there. So yes, managing pain, it's not fun. That's still a thing we got to do.
It's not. But it's interesting to think that it's interesting to make the connection between time and pain, because he talks about the four psychological factors, and the first one being boredom. When I read this section, I was thinking of my 6-year-old's face, where he's always got to be doing something, and if he's not, he's like, Dad, I'm bored. And you can see the pain on his face as he's telling me that he's bored.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I would love to be bored, buddy.
That phrase is one that doesn't get used in our house. Because I'm one of those dads that, if you tell me you're bored, I will solve that problem for you right now.
Well, that's kind of what he discovered too. Is like, well, I can find something for you to do.
Yep. Either make yourself busy or the baseboards need washing. Right? Something will be discovered for you.
Yeah, but I think that maybe we don't deal with boredom the same way that my 6-year-old does, but we do try to cope with this in some way, shape, or form. I think this is what drives a lot of social media behavior. Email too, to a certain degree, although there's a whole section in email I want to get into later on in this book. I feel like email maybe is more associated with work, and so boredom, I guess, could apply there, but more so it's busy work that would appear there. But anytime you've got any sort of space in your personal life, you tend to want to fill it with something, whether that be an endless feed, an infinity pool, or the latest shows on Netflix, Disney Plus, whatever. I think it's important to recognize that just because there's some space there doesn't mean that you have to fill it. And again, I just read Stillness is the Key by Ryan Holiday, so this is really front of mind for me. That just because there's some stillness doesn't mean you got to make some waves.
I think we have a habit of, like, if you have space or you have time, we like to fill it. We just read Margin, which is the antithesis to filling all the open gaps. And it's one that I've kind of been on that train to some degree, as far as taking advantage of times when you're in the car and listening to a podcast while you're driving. It's pretty rare that I'm listening to anything whenever I'm on short commutes or even long commutes. It's usually dead silence. And I'm fine with that. But it seems like whenever I recommend that or mention it to other people, like, what? I could never do that.
Yeah.
Well, yes, you could, in fact, but you don't just jump into that. You have to have a little bit of the mindset that you're just trying to make sure that you have the space to think, and not everyone sees the need for that or wants that. Yeah,
no, makes a lot of sense, but I have to admit that I'm probably one of those people who would push back against that idea too. I don't remember last time I took a car ride in silence. That being said, I also have been fairly intentional about pruning back the inputs in my life. So I don't know, maybe that's evidence that I haven't gone far enough yet. I also think an idea kind of tied to this is this whole concept of ego depletion, because when it comes to quieting inputs or seeking stillness / boredom, if you're not used to it, the first thing you want to do is seek out something to fill that gap. It makes you uncomfortable. And I think another way to say that maybe would be that you don't have enough willpower to just sit there in silence. And willpower is an interesting idea. We read a book on the willpower instinct, and I forget if in that book they talked about willpower as a finite resource. I think they probably did, because that's what most of the traditional psychology world has kind of been teaching that model. But in this book, he mentions a study by, did you see who this was by? Carol Dweck, the mindset lady.
Yeah, I did see that.
Okay, so this showed that signs of ego depletion were only found in test subjects who believed that willpower was a limited resource. So his point is that maybe this whole idea of ego depletion, or the idea that willpower is limited, maybe this is something that we've made up, which is a very interesting idea. And I don't know exactly where I land on this debate or this topic, but I am more and more considering the idea that willpower maybe isn't as limited as we think it is. For a long time, I was all in with that idea that willpower was limited, and I'm trying to limit the number of decisions that I have to make in the morning. Steve Jobs wearing the same turtleneck and jeans every day so he can use his willpower and make the decisions that really matter. But I think that he talks in here about Michael Inslicht, who believes that willpower ebbs and flows like an emotion. I can totally see that playing out in my own life. When I'm in a good emotional state, then I have a lot more willpower than when things are going wrong. And I don't know. I think maybe there's something to this. What was your reaction to the whole ego depletion argument that he makes?
I think it makes an awful lot of sense that willpower is not something that you can wear out. I can tell you, the willpower instinct does refer to it as a muscle. As weird as this is, I have this book sitting right in front of me, So I reached up and grabbed it, flipped to the section on this. Here's a quote from page 57 of the Willpower Instinct, because that's how fast I got there. Self-control is like a muscle. When used, it gets tired. If you don't rest the muscle, you can run out of strength entirely, like an athlete who pushes himself to exhaustion. So that's right out of that book. So I would tend to agree with Nir here that I think it is a thing that you can... I think it is a muscle to some degree, but I'm also of the mindset that, yes, you can develop your self-control. You can develop willpower, and I think that in the process of doing that, you can develop it to the point where you have more than enough for the entire day for pretty much anything. That's kind of the way I'm starting to view it, given a number of the books we've read lately and such. That's kind of where I'm leaning. I don't know if we really need to know the full answer here, other than if you will work on this muscle, it will get stronger, and it won't really ever run out if you don't let it. Because how many times do you run across folks like, at the end of the day, I'd always give in. It's like, well, if you give in at the end of the day, that just means that your triggers are more prevalent at that time.
Sure.
So you're setting yourself up wrong in that case. Whereas, take, for example, my diet stuff that I've been doing for a year now. It's pretty easy anymore for me to resist sweets. And the worst time of the day is at night when everyone else has made their way to bed and I'm kind of left alone cleaning up the kitchen and there's a plate of cookies. Like, it's not that I'm running out of willpower at that time. It's just that is the time of day when it's super easy to cheat because no one would really know. Like that's the time when it's the hardest, but it's not because of anything else that's going on. It's purely environmental at that time. So I think there's a lot that you can do, but if you're smart overall, you'll be fine. Like you can work on this. It'll be okay.
And he would say that instead of the plate of cookies, it's the distraction that we willingly embrace instead.
Right.
By that internal trigger. As you were talking, I kind of got this idea of willpower as a formula, and I don't know if this is 100% correct, but I think there's elements of truth to all of these different things. So maybe you've got so many willpower units, and we'll call that W. Okay, and then the number of willpower units that you have is multiplied or divided by the emotional state that you have. So let's say there's a negativity scale on from 1 to 10, where 1 is you're not negative at all, 10 is you had a really crummy day and you're just feeling super bad about everything. Okay, so maybe W divided by, we'll call that E, emotional state, W divided by E. So if you've got 100 willpower units and you had a really crummy day, that's reduced on the 1 to 10 scale. Again, just completely arbitrary numbers, but your willpower then has gone from 100 to 10. It's significantly reduced based on your emotional state. I don't know. I guess I'm kind of a logical person, and I've always kind of liked math, so envisioning it in like a formula like that kind of helps me understand it a little bit better. But I think there's probably a relationship between those two variables, and the emotional state is kind of a force multiplier, however you want to work that into the equation for either good or bad when it comes to the amount of willpower that you have. Whereas the willpower instinct, that being a muscle, that just assumes that everything else is constant. You've always got these many willpower units, and that I don't think is completely true.
Sure. I don't know that you're wrong. I don't know if it's right or not. I'm not sure I 100% followed your formula, but it's a cool concept.
Maybe I should write a book on it.
Definitely.
No, there's enough of those.
Follow-up.
All right, let's go into part 2 here, which is make time for traction. There's a couple things I wanted to talk about in here. Remember, traction being the things that we want to do, moving us towards what we really want. There's 4 different chapters in this section, but the first chapter, it talks about turning your values into time. And for anybody who cares at all about calendar management and has listened to you or I for any length of time probably already knows everything that's going to be in this this section. Basic idea is make sure you have time on your calendar for the things that are important to you. But one of the things that jumped out to me in this section, he breaks down the 3 different domains where you spend your time. He says you have yourself, you have your relationships, and you have your work. I'm not sure I would break them down into those 3 buckets. I kind of think the buckets are kind of pointless, but that was the thing that kind of tipped the scales. That was the tipping point in my mind for understanding how important it was for me to plan my week every single week. He's got a weekly calendar template exercise in this chapter, and I didn't really care for the exercise itself. I've gone through and I've planned my ideal week before. I tend to do it every quarter when I do my personal retreat. But after reading this chapter, I got inspired. I'm like, I need to be doing this every single week because I need to make sure that all of my priorities are showing up on my calendar. And that way I can make sure that I'm making time for traction and eliminating the time for distraction, making sure that I'm moving in the right direction.
Yeah, he goes big into time blocking here, which is definitely not a new concept. I think in this case he maybe struck a chord with me because I've done time blocking. I've done the whole ideal week thing. You know, it's a Michael Hyatt deal that he's been talking about for years now. And a number of people reference Michael Hyatt when it comes up. I'm not sure that he's the author of that concept, but I think he's the biggest promoter I know of for that idea at this time. But I know that I've gone through that exercise probably 4 or 5 times over the last probably 3 years. And I always come away with it with a sense of this would be amazing, and I work really hard on it for 2 weeks, and then I stop using it. And in this book, I got I don't know if I want to say motivation or the understanding behind it at a deeper level, and it made me want to give it a solid run again. I don't know if this is something that will stick. I definitely stole a shortcut that our friend Max Sparky put together that lets him set up calendar events for the day automatically. So he can trigger a Siri shortcut that does that. And I have a couple of those for setting up weekend days or weekdays. And I've been playing around with this week just as an experiment to see how it would go. I've always been terrible about following through on my own personal commitments to myself. I'm much better at doing them for other people, not myself. So this is something that I've always struggled with, and I know that. But I'm willing to give it another try. We'll see how it pans out in the long run. But I figure it's worth a shot, Mike. We'll see. It's worth a try, right?
Yeah. I'm a big fan of time blocking myself. So I've been doing it pretty consistently for quite a while. And my process of this has been for daily time blocking, where the night before I will, actually as part of my shutdown routine, go into GoodNotes and I will plan out tomorrow and give every hour a job basically. And then when I wake up the next morning and I'm about ready to do my work, I take out my pen and paper and I jot down just a short list of the things that I want to do today. I have the plan written in GoodNotes, but at that point, once I transfer it, it's like that's already done what it needed to do and provided the intention or direction for how I'm going to spend my time. At that point, I feel free to chuck it if I want to, but I also don't feel frantic like I don't have a plan. But I have not been doing it on a weekly basis. I've been doing it on just a daily basis. I want to start doing it on a weekly basis too. I feel like that's kind of a missing piece for me. And the hypothesis here is that if I sit down on a Sunday probably and just spend 15 minutes thinking through what's going to happen throughout the week, I will be able to anticipate the pockets of time where I can do the things that I want to do and not waste them. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I feel like by doing it on a weekly basis, I'll get a little bit higher up in the 50,000 foot view that David Allen talks about. Teaser for the next book. And I'll be able to get a little bit bigger picture view, which is going to help me make sure that the stuff that's lower down in the day-to-day is moving in the right direction.
Yeah, how does planning for your day-to-day change from planning for the entire week? Because like my initial run at doing this has been on a day-to-day basis. So the night before, I'm triggering this and setting up the next day. So what is it you're doing different on the weekly basis?
Well, okay, so let me give you an example. My oldest son is on a basketball team, and I would typically sit down the night before, look at the calendar, and realize, oh, he's got a game tomorrow. And that may or may not throw off everything else that has to happen that day. If we have to travel to get to that game, I'm going to be at that game regardless. So usually it's the other things that got to get moved around to make that happen. And the intention is that if I can at the beginning of the week say, okay, he's got a game on Tuesday and on Thursday, I know those are coming up. So on Monday or Wednesday, when I have a little bit, I find a pocket of time, I can maybe work a little bit more on my work projects so that I can cut out a little bit early in order to get to the game. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
So it's not dealing with things as they pop up. I've got a little bit more runway and a little bit more time, warning, whatever, to make the adjustments necessary in order to make everything work. Now, if you have enough margin built into your schedule, you can probably just go with things. But I want to build more margin and then also become more intentional from the beginning of the week on. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I'm not tackling those one at a time. Yes, I'm still going to fill out the day-to-day time blocking for the next day, but I'm anticipating that by looking at the whole week as a whole, that's going to help me out and provide exponential dividends in terms of the day-to-day planning and help me be more effective in the time blocking on a daily basis.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
Now I might have to do more time blocking. Okay.
It's fun. Everybody's doing it.
That's what I'm told.
Other thing I wanted to talk about in this section is scheduling relationships. It's chapter 11, scheduling the important relationships. And he has a story in here about how he and his wife host a regular kibitz. Do you know what a kibitz is, Joe?
Well, I do because I read about it, but I'm sure the listeners do not, at least most.
Okay. So I don't know if this is like the strict definition of a kibitz, but the way that they do it is they've got 3 other couples that they get together with. I think it's once a week, and they share like a 2-hour meal, and they come prepared to discuss a topic or answer a specific question. And that's a lot of formal structure and detail for this get together, which I'm not 100% sure I can pull that off. I would like to. As he's describing this kibitz, I'm like, man, how do I get an invite? Because that just sounds amazing to me. But there are a handful of people in my life that I know I need to develop more intentional relationships with. I kind of think if I were to describe the kibitz exactly as he's described it in this book, they'd be like, that's dumb. I'm not doing that. But I do think that I can 80-20 this and get people on board. So I want to start hosting regular kibitzes with a couple other couples from our church. And I need to spend a little bit more time thinking about how I'm going to frame this to get buy-in. But I think that this is a really cool idea.
It really reminds me of like a small group that gets together on a regular basis, which is something we do through our church. But I think this is maybe a little more involved than that. Traditionally, a kibbutz is actually a community. Think of it as a small socialist community because they share absolutely everything and they're self-governed in that way, if I understand them right. So it's a collective community. I think traditionally they were just an agricultural thing. Anyway, that's all history, Israel, yes, Jewish. But I think that for us, as far as how that applies in our lives, is I know we have our small group and we'll have like couples over once in a while, but it's not a regularly scheduled thing outside of our small group meetings, which are every other week. We always have a meal whenever we do those, and it's as many people can come as they can. I think there's 5 couples total in that. I don't know if that would qualify per what he's getting at, but I think it's at least pretty darn close. That's my perception anyway.
Well, I think it could, but I also think that my experience with small groups, that it wouldn't. So a small group, as I've been involved with them, typically it's like a Bible study or something, and you go there, yes, to be with other people, but primarily the focus is on the material, reading the chapter, completing the workbook, whatever. And at least the way my brain works, I tend to focus on, well, I got to get this chapter done. I don't focus on like, I'm going to go hang out with Johnny. So when I'm reading this and I'm like, I need to host a kibitz, I want to remove any sort of achievement from the process, any sort of focus other than the relationships from the process. I want it to be something that's not, there's no expectations associated with it. And I think that's part of the challenge for me framing this the right way, because everybody's busy. And so I have to frame it as in a way that people understand that like we're solely, the whole purpose of this is to build these relationships. It's almost like going to somebody to be like, hey, I really want to be a better friend with you. Will you commit a couple hours every couple of weeks to hanging out with me? Which sounds kind of ridiculous if you put it that way, but that's kind of what we're going for. But I also want to, I think there's value in this to everybody that I've targeted for my kibitz. And I think I can cast that vision and get people on board with it. I think underlying, they probably have the same goals or desires that I would, in terms of, yeah, we really need to just spend more quality time together. We're doing a lot together already, but it's usually service oriented, and we're busy and we're working, even if it's not at work. And I want to start prioritizing the relationships and the people, going back to my words for the year, more than the tasks or the projects.
I think this is where our small group tends to break the mold, because we have a running joke of, are we going to do material this time? So we're terrible at actually doing the studies and getting through whatever it is we feel we should do. So I think for the last 9 months or so, what we've really been doing is we get together. We always have a meal together. I think 6:30 when we meet, and somewhere around 7:45, 8 o'clock, we'll migrate to like a living room or something, and then we just go around the circle and do prayer requests. And that gives everybody the opportunity to share, like, what are you struggling with in life? What do you need prayer for? What's the celebrations that you have going on? And everyone gets the chance to share in that. And then we do a prayer time, and then it's just a conversation after that. That is the sum total of what we do. So it's not like there's any prep work for it other than food. So that's why I say I think in our case this is a little odd and might qualify. But I also understand what he's getting at is building deep long-term relationships, which I think is something that my wife and I have been very intentional with when it comes to other couples and families in the church that we know and want to get to know more. So I feel like we have a pretty good setup for it. I don't think we're going to get together with another 2 other couples on a regular Saturday morning or something. It just gets to be too much of a scheduling mess for us. But if you don't have other couples that you're regularly connecting with and having those deep conversations with, I could definitely see how that's something that people really want to work towards.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm rambling. I'll stop rambling now.
No, your small group, it sounds really interesting. Like I said, it sounds very different than every other small group I've ever been a part of.
We break a lot of rules for sure.
It's also very appealing to me. But yeah, so this is a formal action item for me. By the time we record next, I should have some feedback on how it went as I floated this idea to different people.
Good.
And to tell you the truth, this kind of scares the snot out of me. I don't like hanging out with people very much. I'm more of a loner. I prefer to be at home in a corner with a book,
Yep.
But like I said, this is something from my reflection. This is one of my words for the year. I know this is something I need to prioritize. So this was the right thing at the right time, at least this part of this book. And that's going to be one of my action items for sure.
Sounds good.
All right. Part 3 is hack back emotional triggers. There's a lot in this section, lots of different chapters on hacking back group chat, hacking back your smartphone, hacking back your desktop, your online articles, your feeds. Lots of cool stuff in here. To be honest, there was a little bit of a desire as I was going through this, like, oh, we should talk about that one. Oh, and we should talk about that one. Oh, we should talk about that one. But I limited it to 2.
I'm proud of you, Mike.
So if you want to, I will put a plug in here though for like hacking back your smartphone, because you have an article in the Mindfulness Monday thing that I started over on the Sweet Setup, which is very much in line with what I was hoping that would turn into, is like ways that people are intentionally setting up their devices to, in Nir Eyal's words, hack back your smartphone and your feeds, your notifications, things like that. So we'll link to that in the show notes if people want more of that type of stuff. They can go there. But the 2 things I wanted to talk about here were email and meetings. Email, because you and I have talked about email a lot over the years, and he's got an interesting formula here, which I wanted to talk about. And then also I wanted to see how Joe's email situation is.
Huh. And what would you like to know, Mike?
Is this still a area of pain for you?
I think that it has been somewhat. I get around 120 emails a day still, and always fight with myself over how much time to put towards it, and am I getting through it enough? I can tell you that in the last week I've been pretty good about having one scheduled time every day to go through and respond to emails and try to get back to people in a good time. What I didn't know, and I only learned this because of reading through Indistractable and Nir mentioning the concept of writing emails and scheduling the time when they should go out.
That's where you found out about send later.
Yeah. So I did not know that MailMate has a send later field where you can put in the date and time of when you want that email to be sent. I did not know that this thing existed. And whenever I discovered that, I immediately moved any and all accounts I have straight back into MailMate. I was running dual applications, MailMate and Apple Mail, for a bunch of reasons. But I did put it all back together into one and start using MailMate 100% once more and trying to use this send later functionality. And so far, I am loving that. It's made my life so much easier because I can put those replies together, choose when they need to go out, and make sure that they're being sent to that person at the right time. Because that does matter quite a bit when it comes to, especially things at a church, because there are a lot of emails that I need to send out about a certain Sunday, but I don't want them to go out before this coming Sunday because it'll confuse the people receiving it about what day am I referring to. Even if they have the date on there, people still get it wrong. One of my frustrations. Anyway, I feel like I'm doing better with email.
All right.
I don't keep it on my phone. I am better about not checking it multiple times a day, hundreds of times a day. It's getting better. I think I'm slowly, and I think some of my work scenario has allowed that because I'm not necessarily in a client-based system. Like my work isn't dependent on clients anymore. It's definitely service-oriented, but it doesn't have the speed with which I used to operate under. Does that answer all your questions, Mike?
Yeah, good for you. I want to tie this back to the first chapter in this section, which is Ask the Critical Question. And this is something that I feel like I have done a pretty good job of for a while, but that also publicly facing means that I may come across as a bit of a jerk because I am intentionally bad at email. But the question that he poses at the beginning is this trigger serving me or am I serving it? And I found that the majority of the email that I was receiving was requests from somebody else for something that they wanted, which really had nothing to do with the things that were important to me or the things that I was measuring success based on. It was, in Nir's words, probably all distraction. Not at least a very low traction to distraction ratio. So I've kind of cut this out for the last, I don't even know, probably a couple of years at this point. But I totally recognize why this is so difficult for a lot of people. And there are a lot of tactics in this whole section on hacking back external triggers. I don't really want to go through all of the different tips that he gives for reducing time spent in email. But I do like this formula that he came up with. And this is, again, not something that is new to me necessarily, but the way that he described it is kind of new. And that is that the amount of time we spend on an email, capital T, equals the number of messages received, or N, times T, time spent on each message. Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. And if you hear me describe that on a podcast, you're probably like, well, there's nothing revolutionary there. But if you view this as a math problem, there are two variables that you can control here, and you can very obviously see which ones they are. Number one, you can reduce the number of messages that you receive, or number two, you can decrease the amount of time spent on each message, which is why somebody like, I think it's Chris Bailey, who has the autoresponder at the bottom of his emails that's saying, sorry, everything's so short, but I keep my replies to 5 sentences or less. Somebody does that. I forget exactly who that is, but you totally understand why they do that kind of thing.
I think it's our friend Josh that does that.
Okay. No, he stole that from somebody because he's not the first person I've heard that from. But anyways, it makes that sort of approach a lot more palatable when you understand why. And that's the thing that a lot of people have trouble when you suggest something like that, like, oh, I could never do something like that because I'm going to offend people. Well, the people that you're going to offend are the people who don't understand how much time you're wasting in email, and they're just contributing to the problems. So at some point you do have to, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say it that way. You don't have to hurt feelings necessarily, but you do have to push back a little bit. And there is a chance that people will take offense to that, but it's important. And when he talks about email here and why it's so addictive and how it takes the average person 64 seconds to reorient on what they were doing when they went to check their email, think about that. So let's say you used to check your email 100 times a day. Every time you checked it, even if you didn't get a message that you had to do anything with, it took you 64 seconds to reorient. That's almost 2 hours of your day reorienting just from checking the email. So I think like a couple big takeaways from here. One you already mentioned is batch process. And then number two, ultimately, if you can get to the point, that's great, like I have, where that people are going to be maybe offended by your your approach to email, but you just choose not to live there. That's ultimately where you want to end up. Now, I say that because that's one area where I have had some success in, but the other area here, meetings, is definitely one where I have not had success in. Oh, man, I have been in a lot of meetings lately, different organizations and things that I am involved with, where they're just not good meetings. And he has in this section a couple of great ideas here for making meetings better. And I admit that I am scared to try any of these, but I also think that all of these tactics are brilliant. So one of the easiest ways to prevent meetings, he says, is to require two things: that meeting organizers circulate an agenda of what problem will be discussed, and that they give their best shot at a solution in the form of a brief written digest. I love this. I feel like, yeah, absolutely. If I was able to convince everybody that I'm involved with that these are the two rules for creating a meeting, that would significantly eliminate the majority of the meetings that I'm sitting in, but also probably not going to happen. I do like this other one, though, for maintaining attention during meetings. I feel like this one has a much better chance of success, and that is no screens. It drives me nuts when I see people sitting in a meeting behind a laptop screen. my initial thought is you're not paying attention at all. Not that you're playing solitaire, but you are probably checking email or social media or something, but you're not paying attention to the person who is speaking. Whether or not that's me is kind of irrelevant. It just grinds my gears when I see that.
You want to know the screen that drives me nuts in meetings?
What's that?
Apple Watches.
Ooh, yeah.
This is one that is usually ignored when this topic comes up because everybody says phones and computers put away. But the moment that happens, you know what follows. The people with Apple Watches are looking down at those silly things about every 5 minutes. And that drives me nuts because it's just as bad.
Yeah, true.
So I get frustrated by it because the theory that I'm always told is meetings are when the Apple Watch is shining because it allows you to check on and get the notifications you really need from people who really matter without pulling out your phone or getting your computer out. Like, that's the idea, which is, in my mind, an excuse to check a screen when you shouldn't be. Like, that's my view on it. So anyway, that's kind of my pet peeve. And it's one of the main reasons I don't have an Apple Watch, because I don't want that temptation there, because it's slowly replacing the phone checks from at least the people that I'm around that have them. It ends up replacing that. So you might as well pull your phone out because it's checked just as often. And I notice it every single time. I'm told people don't notice it. Yeah, we do. It's all over. So anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox now. But I am lucky in the sense that I have exactly one meeting every week that is on the calendar. It's regular. It's about an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, sometimes it's 1 hour, with our entire staff at church. And it's run pretty well. There's usually, we have a set agenda. It's the same every time because it's event-based. So we're trying to make sure that we've got all our events for the next week, month, 2 months, 3 months out in process. So it's basically a project management check-in, and that does work pretty well because we're covering a lot of ground very quickly. Other than that, I have one-on-one conversations with people in hallways, and that's pretty much the extent of what my meeting life looks like right now. And I am not upset about that at all because most of my time is spent working on task lists instead of talking about task lists.
Lucky.
Yep, I'm not complaining about that one at all.
Regarding the Apple Watch thing, he mentions, this is way in the last chapter, but he has this statement when someone picks up their phone in a social situation. He says, "I see you're on your phone. Is everything okay?" I wonder if you could adapt that to, "I see you keep looking at your watch. Is everything okay?"
I should totally do that. I know you would hate me for that, I'm sure.
Yeah, do that and see how it goes. Report back. See if people are like, "Oh, sorry," or if they're like, "What?"
Yeah. Why are you calling that out? You're not supposed to notice this. Nobody sees me do this.
You didn't see anything. So yeah, if you're looking for a lot of productivity tactics, there's lots of them in this section, lots of broken down into different chapters. But yeah, I think we can wrap that one up here. Let's move on to the next section, which is part 4, prevent distraction with packs. And 2 things I wanted to briefly talk about in this section. Number 1 is his burn or burn pact, which is an example of a pre-commitment. And this was where he wanted to lose weight, so he would tape a crisp $100 bill on his calendar, and he would either work out that day and burn the calories, or he would take a lighter, which was right by the calendar, and he would burn the $100 bill, which was obviously painful because $100 is a lot of money. So I don't know that I'm ready to start burning Benjamins, but I think that putting a price tag as a consequence on for not doing an action that you want to do is an interesting idea. I've heard of people doing this digitally where like they'll schedule an embarrassing tweet to go out in the morning if they oversleep and they have to physically wake up and manually turn it off every morning to prevent it from going out. That would be another version of this. And I don't have an action item here specifically for how I want to start using these pre-commitments or create these packs. But I think it's an interesting idea. And I think the next time that I have a very difficult problem that I'm trying to solve, I will definitely use this idea of the pre-commitment to figure out how I can establish the habit or the routine that's going to allow me to complete it successfully.
I sometimes do this with tweets where I will tweet out what the topic for my next newsletter is, but I haven't written it yet.
Nice.
So I'll do that sometimes where I'll send that tweet out on a Tuesday morning, and I've not written that, which means that sometime that day I have to make sure that I sit down and write that article.
Now we all know whenever we see those tweets.
The world knows that it's supposed to be coming tomorrow morning. It's like, and I haven't written it. Okay, so that's one thing that I do. I also will sometimes do that with, like, for example, I'm working on a new video course, and I tweeted out that I was doing this, and a rough, I don't think I've given an exact date, but I will be, of when that would release, which means that now I have to do that because people are expecting it. So I'll do pre-commitments like that. I don't really do it where a negative is the default other than just shame, but that's probably about as far as I go with it. I don't really do anything that involves dollars. That seems silly to me, but to each their own. If it works, go for it.
Well, you kind of have done that with Bookworm, because if you haven't read the book and we get on the mic to talk about it, you look like a fool.
There is that, yes.
So there is a negative consequence to that, but I never really thought about it as a negatively charged pre-commitment until you were just talking now. So I don't know if that fits the description or not, but
I don't know. Kind of depends on how you want to look at it. But some people are going to see it and say, "Hey, that's exactly what I have to do." I've heard of people that will, like, if you don't hit this goal, it will someone will donate your money to an organization that you are very much against. Yeah, like I've heard of those as well. Again, it just seems odd to me, but I get that it works for some people, though.
Sure. The other thing that I wanted to talk about here, just real briefly, is the voter study. They had basically one group who answered questions about whether they would vote, and another group that answered questions about whether they were voters. And they found that the group that was asked about being a voter were much more likely to vote. And the same effect can be had with statements like "I can't," which is behavior-driven, or "I don't," which is identity-driven. This reminded me very much of Atomic Habits and the whole identity-based habits versus outcome-based habits. And I thought that was kind of interesting. With voting specifically, it's interesting because that's one of those things that you typically don't think about except for specific periods. And it's interesting to me how changing the phrasing can make people get out and vote where maybe they wouldn't have previously. So in that sense, it's almost like driving the behavior, which I guess is kind of the same thing as the identity-based habits that James Clear talks about in Atomic Habits, although that seems very individual-driven as opposed to, if I say the right words, I can get you to do the right actions. That feels a little bit weird to me, a little bit manipulative, but I don't know. I haven't fully processed that yet.
I think the thing it reminded me of was, I know there are a handful of folks online that will talk about calling yourself a writer or a blogger or a podcaster when you're first starting. Sure. If you want to write a book, start calling yourself a writer. And what does a writer do? Well, a writer sits down and writes every day. Well, if you call yourself a writer, you can't call yourself a writer and not sit down and write every day. Like that's the mentality that goes with that. So I think there is a lot of truth to this, but I don't know how I feel about using it on other people. Like, whenever you start phrasing things in a certain way in order to drive things in other people's actions, like I don't like that feeling. Personally, if I'm talking about myself, absolutely 100% on board.
Yep, me too.
But I don't really want to be trying to do the whole manipulation thing. Maybe I do. I just don't want you to know about it.
All right. Joe's deep, dark secrets.
Evil laugh here.
No, I agree. It's totally different when you're talking about, I want to make sure that I follow through and I do X instead of Y in terms of making positive change in my life. But the moment that you start applying it to other people instead of yourself feels a little bit weird. And so to hear him talk about it in terms of the voter study, and again, you're trying to get people to vote. So that's not in any way, shape, or form a negative activity. But it still feels weird to think that if I call you a voter instead of somebody who should vote, that's enough to get you to follow through and take the action. I don't know. It just didn't sit real well with me.
That's fair.
All right. Part 5 is how to make your workplace indistractable. And the basic takeaway here is that for a lot of people, you can't. No, just kidding.
Yep. It happens.
He does have a diagram in here, which is this circle. It starts with number 1, people here are always connected. That leads to number 2, reducing control over one's time, which leads to number 3, to get ahead, I always need to be available, which leads to number 4, increasing expectations, to be always on, and then that just keeps going. And I work with the Blanc Media team where this is not an issue. We use Basecamp specifically because you can't see when people are online and when they're not. In fact, he mentioned, I forget which section it was in. It wasn't this one, but in this book, he quoted Jason Fried. And let me see if I can find this, because this was really interesting. And I noticed that he actually just retweeted this message. Okay, yeah, it was Hacking Back group chat. Jason Fried says, group chat is like being in an all-day meeting with random participants and no agenda. And he literally just retweeted that specific thing and linked to a blog post about it today. So that was interesting. He talks about how Jason Fried does. Traffic lights are for automobiles, not people. Like the green, yellow, red icons where you're either away, busy, or available.
Yeah.
So Basecamp obviously does not have that sort of thing. And then they've got the normal work hours, and you don't even see your notifications when it's outside of work hours. As we record this, I'm on a 2-week sabbatical, which feels amazing. Really enjoy it. So I am coming from a little bit privileged position as it pertains to this, but I also have been in different situations where I totally get this. He makes the point in chapter 26 how distraction is a sign of dysfunction. He talks about high job strain and environments with an imbalance between effort and reward, predicting a higher likelihood of developing depression at work, which costs the U.S. economy alone over $151 billion annually in absenteeism. And that's a mind-blowing figure when you think about it. And my mind immediately went to all of the startups. I say startups, but it's a lot of companies now that promise an unlimited vacation policy. But below the surface, you know that there are expectations around that unlimited vacation policy, and it's not really unlimited. And I guess me personally, I would tend to just kind of keep pushing until I hit the glass ceiling and find out what those expectations really are. But most people just don't want to rock the boat. They're only going to take 1 or 2 weeks, even though it's unlimited. And so the thing that I've been thinking about is, like, why do we even need these unlimited vacation policies? Well, because the work culture is driving people crazy, maybe. And I don't know that there's a lot that the average worker maybe can do to make your workplace indistractable. I felt like this section is kind of geared more towards the executive who has control over things. But even just awareness of it is probably a good thing and can help you recognize if you're in an unhealthy situation.
I felt like this section was definitely for high-level managers. maybe that's because in my role, the whole point is to be accessible. Like, I'm an IT guy. Like, people bring problems to me when they come up. Guess when they come up? All the time, which means I'm distracted all the time.
Yeah.
A prime example is whenever I came back from Christmas vacation, the first day I was back, I had my coat on, had my backpack, had my lunchbox, walked in the main doors to the building. I made 3 steps inside the building, and I heard, "Joe, welcome back. Hey, can you come take a look at..." Okay, so I go off on the side. We look at the thing. We fix it. I start working my way towards my desk. I get about halfway there. "Hey, Joe, welcome back. Hey, while you're here, can you..." Now, keep in mind, I still have my coat and backpack, everything in my hands. I haven't even made it to my desk yet. I went through 5 different requests before I made it to my desk.
Wow.
So after I got sat down, first thing I did, pour a cup of coffee, pull out my laptop, and go hide in a corner somewhere. Because I knew I was going to have 600-700 emails to work through. So I went, found a corner, hid for about an hour and a half, got through all of that, and then came back. But then the rest of my day was, "Hey, Joe, welcome back. Can you..." Like, my whole day was that way.
Sure.
That's just normal. It's pretty common for me to get 1 or 2 requests for something before I ever make it to my desk. That is normal. So reading this section, I thought, that'd be nice. Not going to happen.
Right.
There's just not anything I'm going to be able to do about that because that's the expectation. The only way I can really combat that is go hide. And people seem to respect that, at least for now. I don't know what that will do long term, but I'm going to take advantage of it while I can. But for now, I just have to run away.
Yeah, that's kind of my reaction to reading this too, was not even that I needed to change anything, but I instantly had empathy for the person who read it and couldn't change anything. I'm like, there's a danger in reading this where if your higher ups don't understand it, that you'll just get depressed about the way things are.
Yeah.
But also interestingly, in this section, they talk about Slack. Slack is one of the things that Jason Fried was railing about in the previous section in this book. I think that was chapter 16, where he had that quote. So Slack is kind of the poster child for, you talk about email being bad. Well, now there's this Slack thing and everybody's expected to be connected at all times. But Slack's got a slogan on the walls of their office that says, "Work hard and go home." So internally, as a company culture, they have this belief that it's okay to be offline. So that really was interesting to me and got me thinking about all of these people who are complaining about things like Slack. Maybe you're just using it wrong. Maybe we just tend to default to craving the distractions and the interruptions. And so we're going to look for whatever vehicle we can that will provide those. And if you really need to use a tool that is super minimal and eliminates all that stuff, great. Do what you got to do. But reading this section on Slack and the company culture that they have there made me at least think, from the way that Nir described it, that maybe it's getting a bad rap when it shouldn't.
Yeah, because I think that Slack, the tool, can be extremely useful in some scenarios. Having worked in client work with a lot of tech companies, I was a part of numerous Slack groups. And frankly, when you're working on something together, half the world away from each other, it's amazing to have that communication while you're both working through things. Hey, I did this. Can you check on that? And then let them go do it, so you're not on the phone listening to silence most of the time. So I think there is definitely a place for that back and forth chat, but the expectation of those teams was that you were on it all the time. Now, me as the contractor in those scenarios, I was able to say, hey, I am a part of too many of these. I can't just sit on yours all day. If you want to pay my hourly rate to do that, sure, absolutely. But I don't think you want to do that. So I never really had anybody take me up on it, so I was able to get out of that culture. It's not one that I have any interest in whatsoever. There have been a couple folks at our church say, "Hey, I've run across this Microsoft Teams thing. There's a chat thing built into that. Do you think we should use it?" And my instant response is no. Like, we are not implementing a chat structure at the church. It never has existed, and I will fight it to the death. Like, I am not putting that in. Call me if you need something. That is what we're going to do. So I think it is fascinating to see how Slack, the company, they themselves don't promote the always-on culture that seems to come with using their tool.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, it would be interesting to talk to a Slack executive about the negative press that Slack gets in the pockets of the productivity world where we tend to hang out, which is the one that is focused on like the deep work, the essentialism, the one thing, that whole side of it, not the efficiency, the life hacks, that sort of stuff. It would be interesting to see their response to that type of stuff, and also what kind of advice or tips they would give on like how they define the right way to use the tool. So one thing that Nir mentions, which I thought was brilliant, and I want to try to implement this, but again, it's not an action item because I don't know if I'll have success, is using emoji to communicate, whether just in like the reactions. So getting everybody to decide on a language, for example, for I've seen the message and I'm thinking about it and I'll get back to you, as opposed to not receiving a response for several days and then sending the person a direct message, "Hey, did you see my question in Slack?" Yeah, I did. I'm just thinking it through, because I do think that for a lot of organizations, communication is super important. You've got to be able to communicate well. You got to make sure that you're able to stay on the same page, have unity in your vision. And so speed of communication does help with that to a certain extent, but also you got to be able to cut out the distractions and focus on the work that's important. I don't know. There's obviously a lot to unpack there, and the line's probably going to be different for everybody in every organization, but it's definitely worth considering.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of different ways you could take this, and not everyone can do things about what's going on, so you really have to translate it to your scenario. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all on this one.
Sure. Although it does give me an idea for my next bookworm book, so.
Okay, here we go.
All right. Part 6, how to raise indistractable children. I didn't really care for this section all that much. There were a couple things that I did want to call out here, but I think this is something you got to figure out for yourself. He does mention this idea of self-determination theory, where your body or the body needs 3 things to flourish: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And so the question is, how can we as parents, those of us who have kids, how can we help our kids develop those skills? One thing that kind of blew my mind was this statistic that teens in the U.S. are subject to 10 times as many restrictions as mainstream adults, twice as many as Marines, and twice as many as incarcerated felons. It made me really happy that we homeschool.
Yeah. I think this section is one that, like, all of his details and the story about his daughter and such, about how they taught her to come up with her own rules around technology, like, it's all great, but there was one thing that I got out of this section that he never actually talked about, that was just kind of a tangential thing that I discovered through reading that, was that, I need to be more focused on teaching my kids to make decisions for themselves instead of helping them make decisions.
Sure.
So that was a thing that it came out of that. I was like, yeah, that's kind of a great thing to be working towards. But he never said that, and it's not part of this book. It was just kind of my interpretation of it. But the more time I've spent with that concept and marinated on it the last probably week, that's hard. That's a lot harder to help them make decisions when I just want to say, no, you can't have a cookie right now. Like that's really what I want to say, but they need to come up with that answer on their own. And that's a lot harder to do in the long run for sure.
Yeah, he also talks, the very first chapter in this section is avoid convenient excuses. And he talks about how technological leaps are often followed by moral panics. So don't deflect the blame when your kids don't act the way that you want them to. Don't blame the sugar high is how he puts it. And I think that that's something that is happening right now with smartphones is people are just blaming the smartphones. And that's not the right approach. He mentions that a lot of parents give their kids smartphones so they can contact them, but it ends up being too much too soon, and that's because they never teach them how to manage it. He talks about swimming pools versus smartphones and how we don't keep our kids out of the water forever. We teach them how to swim, but nobody teaches their kids how to use a smartphone when they give it to them. Well, I want to. I'm not going to just say, here's a portal to everything on the internet. Now have at it. Like that's just stupid. Well, especially when you think about it that way. But we don't recognize the danger in that a lot of times. So that's not something new from this section for me, but I could see for certain people that maybe that is the first time you've kind of heard those arguments and that being valuable. But the big thing, the main point here is to teach them to set their own limits. You mentioned how his daughter set her screen time limits. We kind of did the same thing with our kids and their video game time, where we've got 4 boys who are very much into video games. And we used to limit it to 30 minutes a day, but usually it was my wife who was home with the kids and she had to manage it, which was extremely frustrating. She's trying to work with some of the other ones and go through schoolwork because we homeschool while also trying to keep an eye on the video game time out of the corner of her eye. And then kids are in the middle of a level or something. They don't want to quit and they get frustrated. So one of the things that we did is we bought one of those time timers. I can't remember if I showed this to you when you were here or not.
We have one.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah.
So you know what I'm talking about then, but it's basically a time timer. We had a sit-down meeting with our kids and we're like, okay, so this is not working. We need to change this. And we started by asking them the question, what do you think is fair for screen time? And they said an hour. And we said, okay, we can try an hour, but if we're going to do an hour, then you have to be able to manage this on your own. Mom can't be the one who's telling you it's time to wrap up. So we got one of those time timers that sits under the TV now, and they get an hour of video game time, but they manage it themselves, and they quit before the timer is done. The agreed upon rule is that if the timer goes off before the system is turned off, like powered off, then they lose their video game time tomorrow. And they are the ones who set that rule. So when they go over, there's no argument. It's like, oh, I messed up, as opposed to, oh, mom and dad are so unfair. And I don't know. I guess you could make the argument like our video game time. Maybe that's too much, whatever. But I don't know. It is more than we would have just said, okay, this is how much everybody gets. But I also thought that it's something we need to teach them to manage on their own. And in the big scope of things, like if you look at your screen time on your phone, you probably spend a lot more than an hour in front of a screen. So if you're going to say, well, it's unhealthy, you can't stare at a screen that long, but you are on your phone 6 hours a day, you're a little bit of a hypocrite. So even though I've made major strides in curbing my unintentional technology use, my screen time is a couple hours a day. And I think, I want to teach my kids to be intentional with it. And if video games are the important thing to them right now, that's fine. I'm also going to teach them some positive ways to use it. Like whole family's gotten into Duolingo now. They do coding through Bitsbox. A lot of their school stuff is done on the computer. So they're writing papers, they're making presentations, they're even recording stuff inside of GarageBand sometimes. Like that's all stuff that I consider to be a positive use of the technology. And so I want to obviously limit the quote unquote negative stuff. And again, I don't necessarily have a bone to pick in our video games, good or bad sort of a thing. I enjoy them myself, but teaching them that it's okay in moderation. And when you're done with that, you have to go do something else, which is, I don't know. I was going to say the word productive, but that's not the word I want to use. More intentional. You're going to be making something, you're going to be creating something, you're going to be doing something, not just, what's the word I'm looking for here?
Analog. You got to do something analog, something with another person or something in the real world.
Yeah. Well, we do that too, like you got to go play Legos or something now. You got to take a break. But it's more so the mindset behind it. It's the create, not consume sort of a thing. I don't really care whether you are building a Lego creation or you're working on a puzzle or you're drawing a picture, but you need to stop just consuming stuff.
Yeah, makes sense. So get out of I wanted to say consumption mode. Get out of that mode and get into something other than that mode.
Yes, exactly.
Makes sense. I don't think our kids are old enough to really need to do anything along those lines, though they don't really get the opportunity for screens at all. They have no iPads. There is no communal computer at all right now. The sum total of their screen time, it seems like it's, Sunday night when we watch a TV show together. And that's really all my girls get right now. Granted, the oldest is 6. So we're starting to get to the point where we need to have this conversation and start being a little more proactive about it. But right now it's pretty easy because it's non-existent.
Yeah.
Makes it easy.
Yeah, I miss those days. It's especially hard for some of the older ones, when some of their friends have cell phones. Like they have the devices in their hands all the time. And it's encouraging to hear them talk about how they see their friends using stuff in a way that they know is not positive because we talk about it so openly. But I also know that if I were to say, we're not going to do screens, and then they see their friends who are looking at screens all the time, the fact that they're not connected to them at all is just going to increase the desire that they want to go see what that world is all about. And I want to teach them to navigate it successfully, not keep them from it.
Yeah,
not
sense.
Saying that what you're doing right now is wrong either, but it does get more complicated as they get older, for sure.
Oh yeah, and I know we'll get there, but I'm not there, so I'm going to revel in the moment.
Enjoy it. All right, the last section here, part 7, how to have indistractable relationships. This is literally just 2 chapters, and there's not a whole lot in here. There is the question that I mentioned earlier, which I thought was brilliant. And if I have opportunity to use this, I totally am going to, because I'm not scared of making things awkward. And that is when you see somebody using their phone in a social situation, to call them on it and say, I see you're on your phone. Is everything okay? That's under the chapter 34, spread social antibodies among friends. I feel like you got to be careful with this. For certain people, they're going to totally get it. For certain people, they're going to wonder why you're so weird. You got to have a little bit of a solid foundation there, I feel like, before you would take a tack like that, or not care if you'd get disconnected from this person. So navigate that with care. And the other thing is the idea of phubbing, which I'd not heard this term before, but I thought this was great. Phubbing is to ignore when in a social situation by busying yourself with a phone or other mobile device. I've been guilty of this myself, but honestly, this is something that I see all the time. Like whenever somebody is waiting for coffee at a coffee shop or something, you see them pull out their phone, and I notice those types of things. I tend to people watch, and every time I see it, I'm like, they made it 12 seconds or whatever. And I like having a term for this, but I guess there really isn't a whole lot of practical application of this other than to try to catch myself when I'm doing it. Because like I said, I do this too.
Yeah, I just did this yesterday. Not intentionally. I was at Costco. We were having new tires put on our Suburban, and they were a little bit longer getting that done than we were planning on. The whole family was there, and we were sitting on some tables just outside the tire center, and my wife went to go look for something. I forget what it was, and it was just me and the three girls there, and I had pulled out my phone to do something. I think it was jot down a note or something. And this kind of goes back to the shaming thing of, hey, I see you're on your phone. Is everything okay? A gentleman who worked at Costco came up to me, put his hand on my shoulder while I was on my phone, and said, "You have 3 beautiful daughters. You're a lucky man." Like, he made that comment. And in that moment, it triggered all kinds of things. Like, he caught me on my phone. I think he did that intentionally when I was on my phone. I feel like he was sitting back here just waiting for me to pull it out. That's what it felt like. But at the same time, I loved him for it, because he, in some way, as a stranger, snapped me out of whatever it was I was doing and realized I'm sitting here with my 3 girls and we're not even talking about anything. We're just kind of ignoring each other. What on earth am I doing? This was yesterday. And I was so grateful to that man, but he didn't make me feel horrible about it. So he was very tactful in his mechanism for doing it. So I understand the whole, hey, I see you on your phone. Is everything okay? But I feel like there are a lot of other ways that you could apply that and other ways that you could bring that out. So just mentioning things and talking to them and just, pointing to them and saying, hey, what are your thoughts on what we're talking about while they're on their phone is a great way to just say, hey, I see what you're doing. Stop it.
In a nice way.
Anyway, yeah, I was grateful to Costco, man. Good job, sir.
Nice. I love that story. Well, that wraps up the book. Talk about action items?
Yes, I have a couple. You have a couple. Ready, set, go.
All right. So I've got 2, which I have mentioned already. The first one on my list here is to plan my week every week. That's the one that I feel is going to provide the biggest benefit in how my week goes. And the second one is to host a regular kibitz. And again, I don't know how this is going to go. I'm slightly terrified at the idea of bringing this up to the people that I have targeted. They are kind of, actually I should say they're all couples at our church, and I know some of them will be on board with it. Some of them will be like, what? Why? So it's a very different, diverse maybe group of people in terms of their view on relationships, technology, productivity, whatever you want to define that as. So, but that is my action item, and I will report back on that one next time.
I'm looking forward to that one. And just as completely unrelated side note, every time I look at the outline and see kibitz, I keep seeing kibble.
I know.
I don't know why that is. My 2 action items, one is to try time blocking. So I'm planning out my week, doing the whole batching of my time and trying to make sure that lines up with my values. We've talked about this. The other one is start using Freedom. He mentioned Freedom in the app in the book at one point, kind of offhandedly. I have used Freedom on my Mac a handful of times, and when he mentioned it, I remembered that Freedom had a problem a while back. They're a content blocker that lets you block websites and apps and such, but they had an issue a while back because they were using a VPN to do that, and Apple kind of got angry at some companies that were doing that and pulled their apps from the store. They were one of them. And I remember they were still fighting and working on ways to bring the app back. And I hadn't checked in on them in a long time. So I brought it up, checked in on them. It turns out they do have a way to do it now by blocking content directly through a VPN configuration. I guess Apple went back on it. I don't know. I didn't read up on the story. But long story short, I'm using Freedom and using it at times when I'm writing, but also at night when I'm getting ready for bed to just block everything to where it's not even possible for me to get into anything. It's really nice at night at bedtime because then it's like, if it's scheduled, I know at 9 o'clock my phone's going to be unusable. So I really can't get into anything. Thus, the only thing I can do is pick up a book and go to bed. The thing I should be doing and have committed to doing. So I haven't been using it extensively, but it's one that I want to continue to use more of. So anyway, all that to say, use freedom. Go freedom.
Very cool. All right. Style and rating. So I picked this one because I was interested in the topic, but as I mentioned at the beginning, did not have super high expectations for it. Had a bad taste left in my mouth when I started reading the previous book, Hooked, and I was pleasantly surprised by this one. Despite there being way too many chapters and way too many sections.
Sure.
The last two sections definitely felt like they were kind of tacked on at the end, because the editor was like, oh, you should really talk about this stuff with kids and relationships. Definitely a lot lighter than the other chapters. I feel like there's not as much meat there. So it's one of those books, again, that's probably longer than it had to be. The whole section on hacking back external triggers, that really kind of, it was hard for me to make it through that section because it was a lot of like the productivity tips, tricks, life hacks sort of stuff that I've heard over and over and over and over and over again. So it wasn't a fan of that section. But as we went on in this book, specifically on preventing distractions with PAX and the whole section on making time for traction, scheduling your important relationships, there was a lot of stuff in here that really impacted me more than I thought it was going to. I already mentioned the kibitz thing. Like that alone was worth reading this book in my opinion. He does a good job of explaining things in a way that is very approachable, even if his diagram isn't all that great. I feel like it at least makes sense and it provides the framework for the rest of the book. I think it makes the topic of focus more approachable than just, hey, you need to pay attention, which is kind of the message that you get left with when you read a lot of the other stuff. You get inspired, like, yeah, I just need to pick the one thing that I should be working on. And then you get in the middle of things and, oh, this is also important. And you're like, I don't know what to do. Just forget about it. Like this feels like he gives you more tactical stuff, smaller things that you can do to kind of move the needle in the right direction. So I think it's very helpful in that sense. In terms of how many stars to rate it, I'm going to rate it 4.0. I don't think there's anything super revolutionary in here. It would be cool to take the topic of like kibitz and relationships in terms of being indistractable and productivity and just write a whole book on that particular topic. That's definitely the part that struck me the most. I don't think that's Nir Eyal's thing, or definitely not what he intended to do with this book. There were a lot of personal stories and anecdotes in here. Like he talks about his wife wearing the concentration crown so that she can't be interrupted. I felt like that stuff really added a lot to the book and made it seem a lot less like a business book and a lot more personal and approachable. So I think I would recommend this to just about anybody, although there's definitely going to be different camps of people in terms of whether they think that this book is awesome and they get stuff out of it, or if it's just a bunch of information that goes in one ear and out the other. But in general, if you're looking for something that can help you even a little bit to be more focused on the things that are important to you, or carve out a little bit more in terms of intentionality or eliminating some of the distractions in your life, whether they be personal or professional, I think it is worth a read.
I feel like there is really one main tip or trick that he mentions in the book, and that's time blocking. And he refers to it over and over and over again and uses that as the basis for pretty much every tip and trick in here. And although that's not 100% true, like it's not the only thing he talks about, it's his core that he keeps coming back to. I think if you're the type of the person that needs to understand why things happen in order to make changes, and you're also someone who gets distracted a lot, this is an excellent read for you because it explains why you get distracted and where those can come from, both internal and external, and what to do about it. I think that's super helpful. Personally, when it started off, I felt like, oh man, this could be a 5.0 book. And then we got to the areas where he's talking about time blocking all the time, and I get a little nervous when that's the core thing he's recommending, because I've tried that I don't know how many times now, and it's not stuck. So I don't know if that's me or the concept itself is potentially flawed. I don't know what the answer there is. But I do think that, understanding the why behind it is super helpful. And there are some points here that I got out of it. I'll join you at the 4.0. It feels like that's about the right place to put it. He's an easy author to read. I'll give him that. It was pretty easy to have with me and read through multiple pages or chapters at a time, just because he is a good writer. So well done in that sense, Nir Eyal. So I'll join you at the 4.0, Mike.
All right, cool. So let's put Indistractable on the shelf. What's coming up?
Making It All Work by David Allen. And what am I, 50, 60 pages into this one already? This will be an interesting conversation. I'm not going to say much more than that. I think this will be a fun one to go through. Kind of a follow-up to Getting Things Done. And I have a feeling you're going to have a lot of thoughts on this one, Mike.
All right. After that, I mentioned in the middle of this episode that I knew what my next book was going to be. I want to go through, since we mentioned Jason Fried a couple times here, I want to go through It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. I've read this before as a gap book, and I think this will be an interesting conversation about how this gets applied not only to the workplace, but also to the different organizations like churches that you and I are both involved in.
That'll be fun.
So, and it'll be, a lot of Jason Fried's writing is like these short little chapters, so it'll be another one of those ones where we're not going to try and encapsulate everything that he talks about. We're going to pick out the things that really speak to us and unpack those ideas. So
sure,
I think that'll make a great episode.
Yeah, that'll be a good one. I've read that one before as well, so this will be a reread for both of us, and I have it right in front of me. That'll be fun.
Cool.
It's a good one. I don't have a gap book. Still trying to work on the margin thing, and adding more books doesn't help with that. So, do you have one this time?
I do. So I ordered Principles for Success by Ray Dalio. And if you hear that, you're probably like, wait, Principles by Ray Dalio. Didn't you read that already? Yes, right. We did. Principles for Success is an illustrated, like, kids version of Principles.
Interesting.
And so Principles I absolutely loved. And I want to see what this simplified version looks like. I'm not sure if my kids will like it or not, but I don't know. I think even if they don't really get into it, I think it'll be an interesting review of Principles at the very least. And hopefully I'll recognize that, there is something here for my kids, and they can maybe apply some of the Principles stuff for themselves.
Cool. Good pick.
Thank you, sir. All right. Well, that'll do it for this episode then. If you want to become a Bookworm FM Premium Club member, you can do so by tapping the little icon in Overcast or going to club.bookworm.fm/membership, I believe. And $5 a month will get you access to my MindNode files. Joe has recorded a couple Gap Book episodes, audios for books that he's read as Gap books, and some additional goodies like the Bookworm wallpaper that I designed, and you will be supporting the show, for which you will have our undying gratitude. So thank you to all of the Bookworm Club Premium members who are tuning in live right now as we record this. That's another perk of being a Bookworm Club member. You can attend the live recordings and hear about all my tech issues as they happen live.
Those are very fun. It's always fun to see Mike get frustrated because his microphone won't work. All right, so let's put Indistractable on the shelf, and next time we will join David Allen in learning how to make it all work, and we will see you next time.